Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, an existential crisis at the Washington Post, plus a winter storm watch has been issued for all of North Carolina. We'll get into both of those stories coming up. And a good Thursday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. You can also listen to the show 24/7 on your own time by checking it out in your favorite podcast app or listening online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our show this morning is brought to you by Melissa Gott and the amazing team over at the Law Group here in Wilmington. Visit them online, lawgroupnc.com, or give them a call, 910-251-6088. We also are tracking the much stronger possibility of winter weather throughout this weekend across the vast majority of North Carolina. We lucked out here in southeastern North Carolina last weekend. The predictions of snow and ice fortunately did not materialize. Little bit of freezing rain, maybe early Sunday morning, but for the most part, just regular rain. However, things coming up here in the next couple of days look very different. A winter storm watch has now been issued for almost the entirety of North Carolina. 98 counties, just two on the Tennessee border that don't have that warning. We'll get into the timeline on this and what some of those snowfall totals look like coming up here towards the end of the program this morning. Media is a tough business right now. Last week, I brought you a story. We talked about some of the changes ongoing at CBS News. Barry Weiss, formerly of the Free Press, actually formerly before that of the New York Times, then started the Free Press. She's now taken over the helm at CBS News. And since that period of time, there has been complete and total outrage by all of the liberals and Democrats that work at that news organization because she is interested in promoting the news. She is interested in moving away from the incredibly biased reporting that has driven tens of millions of Americans away from CBS News. And so there's a growing trend of confusion and frustration in the media landscape as those that have been pushing these political narratives for decades are finally getting called on it. Today, I've got a very interesting story that was written over by New York Magazine, the author of it, Charlotte Klein, with a headline that reads this: "There's no vision for why it should exist. Inside the Washington Post's existential meltdown." Existential meltdown at the Washington Post, with the headline image being a picture of Jeff Bezos, of course, Amazon creator and co-founder, all of his other projects that years ago purchased the Washington Post. So yet again, another legacy media outlet, another legacy news organization that has decided and did decide decades ago to move away from actual reporting, move away from actual news. They are now dealing with a financial crisis. They are dealing with an audience crisis, and it is somehow Jeff Bezos's fault. So we'll get into that. Starting off on the story, it reads, and this is right off the bat, "It's been another terrible week for the Washington Post." It's been another terrible week for the Washington Post. "The newsroom is bracing for a devastating round of layoffs, with rumors flying that some desks may be shuttered entirely." Before we get into any more of this, let me make this point abundantly clear. I am not in favor of people losing their jobs. I am not one of these individuals, and you see plenty of these people on the left that love to run around and try and cancel people, try and get them to lose their job, lose their livelihoods. The left has moved on from cancel culture. Some of you have heard me say this before. It's no longer cancel culture. It's life ruination. They want to see individuals that they disagree with politically not only lose their jobs, but essentially want to ruin their lives. And they have made a constant effort to do that. And so I want to state for the record, I don't want people to lose their jobs. I'm not in favor of people, even that I disagree with politically, going through the struggle that is. I've dealt with it firsthand. Many of you have dealt with it firsthand for a variety of different reasons: business closures, workforce reductions. There's a whole variety and litany of issues that could cause you to lose your employment. It's not a fun position. It's not a good thing. It's not a happy thing. It's not a fun thing in any way, shape, or form. So I'm not in favor of people at the Washington Post losing their job or at CBS News losing their job. However, the media landscape, as we talked about last week, is rapidly evolving. It is rapidly changing. And the reality of this whole thing is very simple. If you, as a news entity, a radio show, a podcast, a YouTube channel, whatever it might be, if you are not writing or producing or publishing content that is interesting, that is garnering eyeballs and ears, depending on the medium, if you're not doing that, there is undoubtedly going to be individuals that lose their jobs. Media, the vast majority of it, works on a subscriber and or advertising-based model. And so if you don't have people reading or watching or listening to your content, then you, of course, have to make changes. You have less advertising. In the case of the Washington Post, you've got less people subscribing every single day to the paper itself or to the digital online version of the paper. And with that, unfortunately, tough decisions have to be made. The article goes on to say sports writers were stunned to learn they would no longer be attending the Winter Olympic Games in Italy. Management later reversed course on that, saying that a small contingent would cover the event. While the Washington Post's foreign correspondents have been pleading with owner Jeff Bezos to spare their department in desperate posts on X, noting the groundbreaking work that they've done in Ukraine, the Middle East, Venezuela, and elsewhere at a time when Donald Trump's foreign policy activity has been frantic. I don't know that I'd call it frantic. I mean, he's doing something. I guess in comparison to what the Washington Post allegedly covered in the previous administration, maybe it is accurate to call it frantic because something is actually happening, right? The president isn't missing for weeks on end. He's not hiding away from cameras and reporters. He's actually doing things, right? He's trying to solve the situation in Ukraine, the one that unfolded under the Biden administration, the one that Joe Biden and the Democrats didn't do anything about. That seems to be missing from this article over at New York Magazine. But because the president is doing something, it's frantic. Of course it is. It has to be. It's not the previous administration's fault that this thing started and Joe Biden sat on his hands and didn't do anything about it. But frantic policy decisions from the administration. For the time being, no one knows how deep the cuts will actually be. But staffers are anticipating around 100 job losses in the roughly 800-person newsroom alone, with one staffer telling the New York Magazine every desk is allegedly losing jobs. The expectation is they'll hit next week. The ostensible reason for the layoffs is that the Post, Washington Post, like many other newspapers, is losing money. Exactly. That's the issue. That's the problem. This is business, ladies and gentlemen. This is not government. This is not free money everywhere all of the time. This is business. And the unfortunate reality of business is things change. Conditions change. Customers change. And with that, companies have to adapt. That is what our system is built on. Companies, producers, providers, whatever it might be, they change. They ebb and flow with what's going on. They try and do everything in their power to stay relevant. And for the Washington Post, they have essentially ignored the issue. They have essentially written off the need to adapt, to change, to pull themselves into the 21st century. And as a result of that, the paper has been siphoning cash off for years. There's a reason that it was available at essentially a fire sale price for Jeff Bezos, because it was struggling mightily. And some of that are conditions that can't be controlled. The newspaper medium is unfortunately one that is dying. I know many individuals that appreciate and still love reading a physical newspaper, but it's a dying medium. It's hard for people in 2026 to justify the need to pay for a newspaper when they can get news updates 24/7 around the clock on their phone, and in large part completely for free. It's hard to justify the cost of a newspaper subscription that comes, either very early in the morning or very late at night with news that is already out of date the second that it hits the printer. News that by the second it hits your doorstep, material, significant facts may have already changed. And that is, of course, all due in part to the rapid involvement in technology that has allowed news to be available at our fingertips 24/7, 365. There are good elements of that. There are bad elements of that. The writing has been on the wall for the newspaper industry now for quite some time. And for entities like the Washington Post, there are going to be, unfortunately, major changes that have to come. There are going to be major things that have to change. It is the nature of business, and unfortunately right now, it is the growing nature within the newspaper business. So we've got this article over at the New Yorker. Its headline is, "There's no vision for why it should exist inside the Washington Post existential meltdown." And so as we go through it, this is an interesting part. As I just read, the reason for the layoffs, so like many other newspapers, is it's losing money. But unlike other newspapers, New York Magazine writes, the Washington Post is also in the midst of a demoralizing destruction of its brand that has alienated hundreds of thousands of subscribers and left even its staff unsure what the paper is trying to do, both journalistically and business-wise. I found this to be very interesting. Let me lay out my cards on the table on this. The Washington Post is a rag of a news outlet. You can go back in time, you can go back in history and find, and really maybe even not that long ago, where outlets and entities like the Washington Post were interested in news, where they were interested in providing useful information to the public. Those times have changed. The Washington Post and many other media outlets across the United States have decided to move away from that. They have decided that they're no longer interested in the quote unquote news. What they're interested in now is pushing a narrative and pushing an agenda. One that happens to be very political in nature. One that happens to push a political ideology that they agree with. And so I find it quite ironic that right now, after Jeff Bezos' purchase, who, by the way, is not a conservative, that now there's questions and discussions about alienation of its subscribers. I would make the argument, what about all of the middle, right-leaning, and even conservative individuals that have felt alienated from the Washington Post over the last 20 years? See, I don't think there was much concern about that when the Washington Post decided that it was going to move away in large part from news and essentially turn into an entire opinion column. I don't know that that was the discussion that was taking place in the newsroom. But unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, actions have consequences. And the action to alienate, or the action of moving away from news that people were actually willing to consume, moving away from that and pushing into this political narrative space and covering stories from a very, very biased standpoint is why the Washington Post is in the position that it is right now. If you read through this entire article, which we'll go through, you'll hear that it's like a surprise, surprise, everybody else's fault that this is happening. It's Donald Trump's fault. It's Jeff Bezos' fault. It's not the Washington Post's fault. It's not the higher ups at that company over the last 20 years that decided to shift away from coverage that people actually wanted to read and become nothing more than a mouthpiece for the Democrat Party. It can't possibly be their fault. It's got to be somebody else's. With one staffer telling the New York Magazine, "I'm increasingly finding it hard to justify the cuts from a journalistic perspective. Of course, financially, the Washington Post is in a deep hole, and I understand that. But some of that hole, if not a lot of it, is because of Jeff Bezos. So it's Jeff Bezos' fault. Prior to him purchasing the Washington Post, which, by the way, was already a failing medium, already a failing newspaper in terms of its growth. It was hemorrhaging subscribers each and every year. Yet, surprise, surprise, here we are. Once again, it's Jeff Bezos' fault. Of course it has to be. Can't be our fault as journalists at the Washington Post. It can't be our fault from moving away and completely ignoring any sort of journalistic integrity over the last 20 years. It's got to be this guy's fault. The Washington Post was once known for its independent accountability journalism, dating back to the Pentagon Papers and Watergate and running all the way through January the 6th. It was also once known for being the foremost authority on what's going on in the nation's capital. Now it no longer has a clear identity, a critical component for any paper's success, whether it's the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. The Washington Post finds itself in no man's land, largely because of a series of editorial and business decisions made outside of the newsroom at the highest level of the company. Most notably, Bezos' 11th hour decision to pull the editorial board's endorsement of Kamala Harris in 2024, which led to 250,000 digital readers canceling their subscriptions in protests of Bezos' apparent cowtailing to Donald Trump. Again, it's got to be Donald Trump's fault. It's got to be Jeff Bezos' fault. Can't possibly be the editorial board surprise that endorsed Kamala Harris. Wow, really? You're telling me this for the first time? The Washington Post and all of the liberals that work there and their entire Democrat-run editorial board endorsed Kamala Harris in 2024? Color me shocked. And they wonder why there's no audience. They wonder why there's no people left. So now let's be clear. The Washington Post didn't endorse Donald Trump. They just didn't endorse Kamala Harris. The paper has tried out a new internal mission statement, riveting storytelling for all of America. That's their new mission statement, to effectively replace the Trump 1.0 era motto of democracy dies in darkness, which has always been one of my favorite headlines and my favorite kind of mission statements and taglines of any media entity ever. Democracy dies in darkness has always been their motto. Of course, unless the democracy that we're talking about is under the control of Democrats, right? Democracy dies in darkness unless it's, reporting on the Hunter Biden laptop story, something that the Washington Post passed on, like every other major news outlet, or critically covering the Biden administration for all of their miserable failures and screw-ups. The democracy, as we understand from the left, the democracy is always so important, of course, unless it paints Democrats in a bad light. Of course, unless it could be used as an opportunity to claim that your political party, as writers at the Washington Post, might not be doing something right. Then, to hell with the democracy. It can die in darkness if that's the case. That motto has never meant anything. It's always been this weird kind of Orwellian thing, democracy dies in darkness. It's a left-wing rag. It's been a left-wing rag now for years. Bezos has stunned the newsroom last year by remarking the ideology of the opinion section in support and defense of personal liberties and free markets. Oh my God, can you imagine? A move that was interpreted as another sop to the Trump administration. Opinion editor Adam O'Neill essentially cleared house upon his arrival, turning the section into a MAGA-friendly libertarian outpost, largely free of liberals and progressives. Some of the paper's most prized reporters and editors have lost faith in the Washington Post's journalistic mission and business, left for rival publications, further damaging the paper. So, because Jeff Bezos made the decision that, hey, our entire opinion section shouldn't be full of a bunch of card-carrying progressive liberals, we should probably install some people in here that have a different opinion on things. Because of that, the paper has essentially gone up in flames, according to New York Magazine. The paper has essentially disintegrated in real time because of this. Makes absolutely no sense. It kind of ties in nicely with what we were talking about yesterday morning here on the show. The whole purpose of yesterday's show, which if you missed it, I encourage you to check it out in your favorite podcast app or on any of our channels, YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook. The whole concept of that is how it was about DEI and the current trend that there's very little, if any, intellectual diversity that exists in higher education. Very little, if any, intellectual diversity that exists in the classroom. And I contended that that was a major problem, and I would contend that this is a major problem as well. When you are writing an opinion, and you've heard me say this before, many of you, there is a difference between news and opinion. This show, this program that you're listening to right now is a great example of that. You will never hear me parade around and tell you that I'm a journalist. I'm not. I'm not sitting here and pretending to be a journalist. I'm an opinion guy. I read plenty of news. I cover plenty of news. I deconstruct plenty of news, and I provide my opinion on it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be a journalist. There's a reason that news is not baked into the name of this show. I do another show that is all news, the Carolina Journal News Hour. That is a podcast and a show that if you listen to is all news. Very little, if any, personal opinion at all. That is a news program. This is not. This is an opinion show. I don't shy away from that. I'm not trying to hide it. I'm not trying to pretend that I'm some middle-of-the-road guy that you can just take everything I'm saying and it's 100% truth and gospel. That's not the case. But that's what entities like the Washington Post have done. They have pushed themselves so freaking far to the left that they can't even see straight anymore. They have been called out. Many of their audiences have left. Many of their readership has completely evaporated. And they are now looking for a scapegoat. And in this case, the scapegoat is Donald Trump and Jeff Bezos. It is a similar tack and very similar to the story we covered 1 week ago about CBS News. Why was Bari Weiss hired at CBS News? Why was she put in there as the head of the news division? Because CBS News had been shedding viewership and audiences now for a very significant amount of time. They've been losing advertisers. They've been losing viewers. It is a major, major problem. Something had to change. And so Bari Weiss was tapped for the position. Next man up, even though she's a woman, next man up and see what she can do. Take a crack at it. Can you begin the process of turning this ship around? Because if it continues, we're going to hit an iceberg and sink. That's what many of these media publications and many of these media outlets are kind of looking down the barrel at, the Washington Post included. If they don't make significant changes, they will cease to exist. And so as we continue through this article over at New York Magazine, the problem that seems to be missed by all of these people is they will cease to exist unless significant changes are made. But they don't want to make those changes. They're seemingly not interested in making the hard decisions that have to be made. If the Washington Post, and we're just talking about them this morning based on this article, but this could be relevant for every other or a vast majority of other media outlets across the U.S. right now. If things don't change, if you can't claw audiences back, you will cease to exist. These are businesses, ladies and gentlemen. These are for-profit entities. If you don't have people willing to read, watch, or listen to your content, you can't continue. That's not how this whole thing works. And so this outrage over the fact that Jeff Bezos has put conservatives and libertarians and Republicans on their opinion board and in their opinion section within the newspaper should be something that is applauded. Finally, we're getting individuals that have different viewpoints and different opinions to discuss very complex issues. But no, that's not what the Washington Post is interested in. That's not what all the bleeding heart liberals that work there are interested in. They're interested in reaffirming their own ideology and shutting out anybody that disagrees with them. And that has put the paper in the position that it is right now. They have gone so far down the left-wing rabbit hole that they can't even see daylight. It's just completely black. Kind of funny. Democracy dies in darkness. That's kind of where the Washington Post is right now. Under Bezos' leadership, New York Magazine writes, CEO Will Lewis has floated a bunch of proposals to make the company profitable. kind of necessary, few of which seem so far resemble anything people might actually want to buy. Meanwhile, he blamed the Washington Post's journalists for their plight, infamously declaring at a town hall in 2024, "Your audience has halved in recent years," meaning cut in half in recent years. People are not reading your stuff. So he blamed the journalists, rightfully so, because what he said is accurate. The audience has, in fact, been cut in half. The readership has, in fact, been cut in half. Why is that the case? Because the people that used to pay for the Washington Post feel that they're not getting any value from what they're reading. They don't believe that it is worth the financial commitment for content that they don't think is any good. We are a consumer-driven society. People vote with their dollar. And when they stop paying for what you're doing, you're probably doing something wrong. That's kind of how this process works. Now, executive editor Matt Murray, who was installed by Lewis, is singing the same tune, at least privately, telling a staffer recently that their journalism is just not resonating with readers, according to a source familiar with the discussion. It's like someone who slices your Achilles and then asks you why you're limping. So again, not the journalist's fault that their content blows. It's now the new executive editor, Matt Murray, and Donald Trump, of course, and Jeff Bezos. A former head news desk writer told the New York Magazine, when people are deciding which subscription they could live without, the Washington Post was an easy cut. And then Jeff made it a lot easier with his decisions. And now you're left with something that's basically on life support. There's no vision for why it should exist or why I need a subscription to the Washington Post versus another organization. There were questions about the Washington Post's long-term strategy long before Lewis arrived. Oh, okay. Hold on a second here. What's this? We were profitable in the first Trump administration. We had a loyal readership that was really committed to the work that we were doing and invested in the democracy dies in darkness of it all, said one reporter. Then Biden won, news fatigue set in, and we had not diversified our portfolio. Despite the post-Trump hangover, Murray's predecessor, Sally Busby, added more than 150 roles in her first year to strengthen the paper's coverage outside national politics and investigations. She built climate and wellness teams and 2 breaking news hubs in Seoul and London. But the Post overshot on expenses. Interim CEO Patty Stonecipher told employees in October of 2023, ahead of the largest staff reduction, 240 volunteer buyouts were taking place since Bezos bought the paper in 2013. The Post ended up losing $77 million that year. Interesting. So a business losing $77 million. You might say that something has to change. You might say that that's not sustainable long term. Lewis's leadership team has floated lofty goals of attracting 200 million subscribers in meetings with senior Post editors. But Lewis's proposal to fix the Post have not provided clarity or inspired confidence. Surprise, surprise. In January of 2024, he debuted his Fix It, Build It, Scale It approach, telling individuals social, AI, and personalization are the next opportunities. That spring, he rolled out a more formal plan focused on diversifying revenue streams through flexible payment options to target, quote, untapped audiences. Additionally, subscription tiers for Axios and Politico, Post Pro, Post Plus, and memberships to further integrate of artificial intelligence into Post products. A new team led by Chief Communication Officer Kathy Baird would focus on marketing the Post's star talents. Baird left the Post 1 year later, part of a pattern of fits and starts for Lewis's rebuilding project. In June of 2024, Lewis announced the formation of a third newsroom focused on service journalism and social media, among other innovations. The third newsroom would be a, quote, industry-defining moment for us, Lewis said. Some 6 months later, the efforts were formally introduced as the Washington Post Ventures, led by an individual by the name of Carissa Thompson, a beloved newsroom leader. A year later, Thompson took a voluntary buyout. The Post then announced that the ventures would pivot, becoming a more commercial operation that would operate outside of the Washington Post's newsroom and focus on creator-driven experimentation. So what you've got going on here with all of this, and of course the New York Magazine wants to paint the picture here that everything that is being tried is failing, and that very well appears to be the case. But what is not mentioned in any of this, it's mentioned, I mentioned it back a little bit ago, right at the beginning of the article. This is an industry that is dying. This is a medium that, regardless of what is going on, is struggling mightily. The newspaper industry is a miserable place to be in 2026. I know friends, I have friends that work in this industry. It's miserable right now. Some of it is self-inflicted. Some of it, as I mentioned earlier, is just the change in times. People really aren't that interested in reading a newspaper anymore. They're just not. Many of the digital subscription models are very expensive and not compelling. And when you can open up X or Facebook or any various apps on your cell phone for free and get similar, not exactly the same, but similar coverage for literally zero cost, what kind of incentive do you have to subscribe to the Washington Post, to the New York Times, to the Wall Street Journal, to any of these major publications? We started to see this and have continued to see this in local newspapers for quite some time now. Their stabs have been slashed and cut. There's very little, if any, local content that is produced now in many local newspapers across the country. Later on this year, the Atlanta Constitution Journal, which is one of the longest running newspapers in the United States, they are ceasing production. It was announced just a couple of weeks ago that the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, which is in fact one of the longest running newspapers, they are shuttering their operation. I think it's in May of this year. Why is that the case? Because it's a very tough business to make money in right now. It is a business that is competing with free content that is so unbelievably readily available that it's hard. It's very tough. As somebody that is in media, I have some level of sympathy for it because some of the things that the Washington Post is struggling with truly is not their fault. But some of it is, it's important to note, some of it also is their fault. Their decision to move away from news, move away from compelling content, and become a mouthpiece for Democrat politicians. That's a large part of this, ladies and gentlemen. And their inability to recognize that, their inability to pivot and advance and move away from that is likely what is going to lead to their demise. And there's really nobody else to point the finger at. There's nobody else to blame but themselves. Now, this article clearly is trying to blame everybody but the reporters, everybody but the left-wing hacks that work at the Washington Post. It's hard for me to look at this and say that it's Jeff Bezos' fault. Newspapers were dying when he bought the paper back in 2013. Right? This decline was already clearly in motion. That ball was already clearly rolling down the hill when Jeff Bezos bought it in 2013. Was it a good investment for him? I don't know. We'll have to see how the whole thing ends up shaking out at the end of the day. But the wheels were set in motion on this long before the evil, terrible, awful Jeff Bezos, who the left now seemingly hates, before he got involved in the New York, in the Washington Post. I'm sorry, but that's just a fact. That's the case. So we'll dive into some more of this coming up here in just a couple of minutes. Before that, I want to remind you, coming up tonight, we look forward to chatting with everybody on our Nick Craig Show monthly hangout. We get together once a month at 7 p.m. Well, typically it's 7 p.m., but we get together once a month on Zoom, chat about all of the news, topics, and discussions of the day. Obviously, a lot going on in Minnesota, a lot going on across the nation as well. We'll dive into all of that tonight. 7 o'clock, patreon.com/Nick Craig. You can support the show and get access to bonus content like our monthly hangout. Look forward to chatting with everybody tonight. 7 o'clock, you should have an email from me. If not, I'll log into your Patreon account and you'll see a link listed in there describing our monthly hangout for the month of January. I also want to recognize the Law Group and thank them for their continued support of the Nick Craig Show, and remind you that when legal challenges arise, sometimes good, sometimes bad, make sure you put your trust in the Law Group right here in Wilmington. Melissa Gott and her team since 2003 have experienced attorneys that have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across the eastern half of North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense, if any of those cases are existing, the Law Group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, they're not some big national law firm. They're located right here in our backyard. They live in our community. The Law Group is located in downtown Wilmington and just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. Give them a call, 910-251-6088, or their website, lawgroupnc.com. The Law Group, experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate their continued support of the Nick Craig Show. All right, quick break here. We'll get into more of this story and discussion about the Washington Post. We'll also talk about the increasing confidence of a winter weather event across the state of North Carolina this weekend, as well as the Nick Craig Show rolls on a Thursday morning, streaming live on YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. Good Thursday to you. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show as we continue this discussion, this pretty hysterical piece, if I'm being completely blunt and honest with you, over at New York Magazine about the Washington Post saying that there's no vision, there's an existential meltdown, it's a crisis going on over at the Washington Post right now. Most of it, I will contend, is completely self-inflicted, and yet the New York Magazine has decided that it is everybody else's fault but the people that have made the decisions to put the Washington Post in the position that it is. They want to blame Jeff Bezos, Donald Trump, and all of the people Jeff Bezos has hired. Meanwhile, the newspaper industry across the U.S. continues to struggle, and the Washington Post refuses to adapt. And I mean, let's just look at it. Let's go over to the Washington Post website right now and look at the kind of nonsense that they're producing and wonder why nobody is reading it. Here's their top story. Trump faces faces fresh MAGA blowback for efforts to de-escalate in Minnesota. Democrats demand new ICE restrictions as shutdown looms. How about a couple of their editorial board discussions? The unsettling truth revealed by an attempted attack on Ilhan Omar. They don't want to give an inch even when an American is killed. Trump is struggling to find a winning message for a bipolar economy. I mean, these are all of the above the fold articles and topics over at the Washington Post today, with still their moniker, Democracy Dies in Darkness. For half of Americans, this is not compelling content. For half of Americans, this is not interesting. This is the issue that has been created. The Washington Post and so many other media outlets have been going back to the same well now for 10 years. Since Donald Trump announced he was running for president, many of these media publications have been trotting out the same garbage and nonsense consistently, day after day, month after month, year after year. And the American population has begun the process of turning it off. I read an article yesterday in the media trades that Fox News, once again, is continuing to be the number one news network in the world. Here's the headline over at Barrett Media. Fox News ends January as the top-rated cable news network for the 24th consecutive year. Listen to this. Out of the top 100 cable news broadcasts in the month of January, 98, this is all the different programs, not shows, but like programs. 98 out of 100 were from Fox News. During the month, Fox News averaged 2.4 million viewers in the weekday primetime ratings. In the total category, the network finished the month with 1.4 million concurrent viewers. So for the 24th consecutive year, Fox News has ended the month as the top outlet. So media works. Content works. Fox News is obviously producing compelling enough content that people want to watch. It's the reason why 98 out of 100 cable news broadcasts were Fox News shows and not shows from MSNBC, not shows from CNN. Talking about cable news. There's a reason for that. Fox is producing and providing an audience with content that they want. The Washington Post, CNN, the New York Times, NBC News, CBS News, ABC News, they are not. It's not interesting. It's not compelling anymore. Orange Man Bad for the last decade isn't interesting. Nobody cares. Yes, you've already convinced all of your friends on the left that Donald Trump is the most evil, awful, terrible person that has ever roamed the earth. You have already convinced all of your friends on the left that every Republican is the worst person that has ever existed. We get it. There's got to be something new. There's got to be something more interesting to talk about. But they're not. They refuse to move off of this point. And as I've mentioned earlier, these are businesses. The only way the Washington Post and Fox and CNN, the only way these outlets stay alive is if there's an audience. This is not a new model. Since the beginning of media, this has been the case. You have to have people that are willing to read, listen, or watch your content. And if that's not happening, you need to take a serious, hard look in the mirror and figure out what has gone wrong. Where have you gone astray? Where did you make a wrong turn that has led you down this path? But this entire article over at New York Magazine completely misses that point. It completely admonishes any sort of responsibility from the journalists at the Washington Post that have decided they're not interested in news. They're interested in opinions and narratives. So ending the article, it reads, few people feel these ideas will work without a clear journalistic project at the business's core. And the layoffs might only exacerbate the newsroom's problems, with a former Washington Post reporter wondering, what's the plan after this? You cut however many hundreds of people to solve the fact that you're still losing money. Then what? Well, I can tell you then what. You eventually close the doors. That's how this works. I mean, this is not just media. Like, look at a restaurant, for example. If you have a restaurant that nobody is eating in, you can cut staff, you can reduce workforce, you can cut down on costs as much as possible. Eventually, you have to close the door because nobody's eating in your restaurant. Nobody is coming in to patronize your business. So yes, that's what the plan is after this. If things don't dramatically improve or change for the Washington Post, they will not exist. That's how this process plays out. One thing Bezos' Washington Post won't be doing anytime soon, writes the New York Magazine, is resurrecting the paper's old model of turning a profit. A current staffer said, "It's incomprehensible to me that we have Trump back in office. We have the power and the influence of the Washington Post, and we still can't figure out how to make money." It's a two-part issue. As I've said now multiple times, the newspaper model and industry is dying. It's unfortunate, but the times have changed. The internet has eviscerated newspapers. They really have. And many other media entities as well. Right? We talked about CBS News last week. So that, unfortunately, is not going to change. And for the New York Magazine to write, one thing Bezos is not going to do is figure out how to turn a profit. Yeah, every newspaper is dealing with this across the country. That's not a Jeff Bezos problem. The other side of this coin, however, is the editorial decisions, the content decisions that are made at so many of these media outlets. And for this staffer that anonymously spoke to New York Magazine saying, "I can't believe that we have Donald Trump back in office again." Well, maybe that goes to show your out of control, ridiculous bias. Maybe the fact that you can't get yourself in a headspace that more than half of the country, at least in terms of those who voted, supported Donald Trump, that he won 7 of 7 swing states, that he ran on a message of cleaning up the failures of the Democrat Party, including things like the open border, the economy, foreign wars brewing all over the world. Maybe all of those issues were things that the Democrat Party failed on. I would contend to you that's the case. And I think that's why the president, or now the president, was so successful when he was a candidate. I think that's why he, in large part, why he won. Because the American people found themselves ever frustrated and ever fed up with what the Democrat Party was doing. Many outlets, including the Washington Post, ignored many of these problems. They brushed it off. They hid from it. They shied away from covering the content. And people are frustrated. They're not interested anymore. And so if there is no ability, and it, according to this article and from all of the staffers that spoke anonymously to New York Magazine, they appear to be completely unwilling to self-reflect and look in the mirror. And I can promise you that what is going to happen is if that does not change, if drastic things do not recover over at the Washington Post, in the not too distant future, we will be talking about that newspaper essentially completely shuttering its operations. It will be down to a skeleton staff of individuals that are just regurgitating content from Reuters and the Associated Press. And at that point, you might as well turn off the lights, shut off the printing presses, and pack up your bags. A lot of this is self-inflicted, however. That cannot be ignored, and that cannot be completely brushed to the side when we have these discussions. Media is an audience-driven business. If you don't have an audience, you don't have a job, you don't make money, you eventually go out of business. That's how this plays out. That is how this process works. You don't have to like it. You don't have to agree with it. That's the process. And so for all of these lefties over at the Washington Post that are so dismayed, Jeff Bezos has owned the paper for 13 freaking years now. But because he is, of course, probably looking at the bottom line, looking at the dollar, he's a smart businessman. Christ almighty, he built the most successful shopping website that has ever existed. I would argue the most successful shopping entity, a retail entity that has ever existed in Amazon.com. He knows a thing or two. He's a pretty smart guy, I would contend. I don't agree with his politics. He's not a conservative. He's not a Republican. He knows a thing or two about business. He knows a thing about how to make money, turn a profit. But because there's so much freaking resistance over at the Washington Post, because these moronic liberals can't dig themselves out of their echo chambers, everything he's doing is wrong. It's not their fault. It's his fault. Always with the left. Self-reflection, non-existent, always pointing the finger, always blaming somebody else. It is never, ever once been their fault that something has happened. It's always somebody else's. And most of the time, at least for the last 10 years, that somebody has always been Donald Trump. Why is the Washington Post failing? Because Donald Trump. Great. Very good to know. I'll throw a link to this article over at New York Magazine in our show notes over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. All right, turning our attention to the weather this Thursday morning. Over in the overnight hours around 2 o'clock this morning, a winter storm watch was issued for the vast majority of North Carolina. Just 2 counties on the Tennessee-Georgia border, way out west, literally the farthest west you can go in North Carolina, do not have that winter storm watch in effect for this morning, or not for this morning, but issued this morning in effect for this weekend. So the possibility of winter weather does continue to rise as we head into portions of Saturday and Sunday here across southeastern North Carolina. This storm system, as we saw last weekend, moving west to east. Conditions will start to deteriorate in the western half of the state and move their way central and eastern throughout the weekend. Here is the latest snowfall forecast. This is the expected totals from the National Weather Service here in Wilmington. This was issued around 6 o'clock this morning. So this is the latest from the Weather Service, predicting anywhere between 4 to 5 inches of snow immediately in southeastern North Carolina, portions of Wilmington. As you get north into portions of Pender County towards the Burgaw area, driving straight up Interstate 40, you could see those totals closer to half a foot. Either way, it is looking like a pretty substantial winter weather event across southeastern North Carolina. Got a couple of the weather model outputs to look at. This is the United States model, or the GFS system. Still a little bullish on snowfall totals, showing much larger totals here across the southeastern half of Wilmington, of North Carolina. Looking at potentially 6, maybe even 7, 8 inches of snow across the Wilmington area. That is what the GFS is looking like. However, the European model seems to track a little bit closer with what we are seeing from the official forecast from the National Weather Service, showing between 2 to 3, 4 inches in and around the Wilmington area. Some higher totals out towards Charlotte and Raleigh as well. So it is, regardless of exactly where you are in the state, we are looking at the growing increased concern of a major weather event. I'm looking now. The Weather Service was supposed to have a briefing out this morning. Yeah, they said by 8:30, so it's still not out here as we do the show live here a couple of minutes before 8 o'clock. However, this is the latest as it relates to the timing of this event. So we would be looking at this here locally. The snow throughout the day on Saturday, probably greater odds into portions of Saturday afternoon, into Saturday night, and into the early morning hours of Sunday before the system gets out of here. However, we are going to see some potentially really gusty winds with this as well. There's the thought that we could see even some blizzard-like conditions as it relates to this winter weather. That's probably more north here towards the Outer Banks, but there will be some gusty wind gusts that could allow and lead to some level of power outages as well. And it is going to be brutally, and I mean brutally, cold in the coming days as well. Pulling up the latest 7-day forecast here from WECT News, we are going to see incredibly cold temperatures over the weekend. Saturday, a high of 36 degrees, the low of 16. Same thing Sunday night into Monday. The temperature is not even going to crack freezing on Sunday. Low temperatures around 16 degrees on Sunday. Monday, we start to see a little bit of a recovery possibly with the temperature, and it's going to not be until mid to late next week that we will see low temperatures that are at or above freezing. So regardless, if you are not a fan of the cold weather, unfortunately, you're going to have to strap in for the next, almost at least the next week, as we continue to watch these very cold temperatures, looking at the possibility of a major snow event here for southeastern North Carolina coming up this weekend. We should have a better idea by tomorrow, even later in the day today. We'll have a better idea of what those snowfall totals are to look like across southeastern North Carolina. Stay tuned to my social media channels. You can follow me over on X at Nicholas M. Craig, or like the Nick Craig Show on Facebook. As we get into the afternoon hours today, I'll throw a post up there with what those snowfall totals are going to look like here across the state of North Carolina. And coming up here tomorrow morning, we'll have essentially a final call forecast as to what that is going to look like. So make sure you're prepared. Not that we're going to be dealing with major icing or anything like that, but the roads, travel could be treacherous for at least a couple of days, depending on when this snow system moves through, especially Saturday into early morning Sunday. So be advised of that and keep that in mind. We'll bring you the latest right here on the Nick Craig Show. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. Melissa Gott and her team. Visit them online at lawgroupnc.com for any legal challenges you might be facing across eastern North Carolina. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook. It's also available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app. The show also is heard live 9 to 10 p.m. on Charlotte's FM News Talk, 107.9 WBT. We'll do it again tomorrow morning, Friday, right here on The Nick Craig Show.